Thank you, Graciela. I am honored to introduce you to today's guest, a phenomenal writer and public figure whose work has been translated into numerous languages and whose readership extends across countries and cultures. He has had one of the longest and most prolific literary careers in the Spanish-speaking world. His contributions to literature, political science, global understanding, and Mexican and Latin American studies are immense, and his novels and essays have become permanent in university canons across the world. Some of his most widely read novels, including Terra Nostra, The Death of Artemio Cruz, and The Old Gringo, focus on conflicts of identity, change, modernity, and social class structures within Latin America. His leading role in Latin America's literary El Boom of the 60s and 70s led to worldwide recognition of some of the most important Latin and Mexican writing of the 20th century and renovated all Hispanic letters. He was of the first to write and publish an analysis of the new Latin American novel. This essay remains to this day one of the earliest and most insightful analyses of this major literary phenomenon. His incredibly productive career as a writer has led to his success and recognition as one of the most influential essayists of Mexico. He has spoken about and for Latin America in every major literary forum and has devoted his life to being a crucial voice for not only a better Latin America, but for a better world. Spanish poet David Huerta once said, "He is not a writer among many others, rather he is the Mexican writer par excellence." He has received some of the highest literary awards in the world, including the National Prize in Literature, Mexico's highest literary award, the Miguel de Cervantes Prize, Spain's highest literary award, and France's Legion of Honor, and was the first ever recipient of the Latin Civilization Award. His latest book, This I Believe, A Life from A to Z, has already been awarded the Spanish Royal Academy's Prize for Best Book of the Year. His relationship with Dartmouth College and his contributions to the Dartmouth community have been distinguished for quite some time. He holds an honorary doctorate from Dartmouth and has been a frequent visitor to our campus. He's been invited as a lecturer, has taught as a distinguished visiting professor in Spanish and Portuguese, and as a Montgomery Fellow. In order to give you a sense of the impression he's made on the Dartmouth community, I'd like to quote Harold Montgomery, founder of the Montgomery Endowment, who described one of his prior visits as, quote, one of her most delightful periods on campus, a speaker who exemplifies the creation of the endowment. We are so happy and honored to have him back at Dartmouth for this very special day. His title for today's 5th Suzanne Zantot Memorial Lecture is The Creative Spirit as a Force for Humanism. So please join me in warmly welcoming back the outstanding writer and Latin American cultural ambassador par excellence, Carlos Fuentes.
Thank you for your words, President Wright. Tante grazie, Professor Parati. Muchas gracias, Lilly Kanso. I am honored to be the guest of the Comparative Literature Program at Dartmouth on its 10th anniversary. Congratulations. And in honor of the memory of Professor Suzanne Zantot, whose living heritage is with us today, in our words, in our hearts. Your invitation came under the title As White as These Beautiful Spring Skies. I've tried to tighten it without clouding it as a talk on Cervantes on the 4th centennial of the publication of Don Quixote de la Mancha, and through the tradition of Don Quixote to speak of the children of La Mancha, the descendants of Cervantes. A very wide and open tradition. I have an article of faith. There is no tradition without a creation that renews it. And there is no creation that does not sustain itself on a preceding tradition. I think that no work of literature better illustrates this than Don Quixote de la Mancha. Cervantes' book springs from a noble clear and yet dissimulated tradition. And it prolongs itself in a tradition that becomes, because it originates and baptizes it, the very creation of novel form. From what tradition does Don Quixote come? From that of Erasmus of Rotterdam and his Praise of Folly, 1511, one of the essential books of a Renaissance triad that would include Thomas More's Utopia of 1516 and Machiavelli's The Prince of 1513. Utopia, what should be. The Prince, what is. The Praise of Folly, what might be. Cervantes' teacher was the Spanish Erasmist Juan López de Hoyos, and Spanish Erasmism, promoted by the brothers Juan and Alfonso Valdés in the court of Charles V, testifies to the profound presence of the sage of Rotterdam in Carolingian Spain. But in the wake of the Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent, 1545-1563, the Spanish monarchy stepped back from its Renaissance temptations and sent Erasmus from heaven to hell. His books were banned, condemned in the Index Prohibitorum, and his portrait in the Inquisition's archives smeared with bloody fangs and demonic stare. What was then Erasmus's dangerous lesson? He tells us himself, I quote him, "All things in life are so obscure, so diverse, so opposite, that we cannot be absolutely sure of any truth." Erasmus wished to warn his times against two dogmatic dangers, the perils of faith as an absolute, but also those of reason as sufficiency. Neither blind faith nor hermetic reason, Erasmus opts for the ironic shortcut of the praise of madness in order to save his own times from both the absolutes of the faith it abandons and of the reason that steps forth in its place. Don Quixote is a novel fully inscribed in Erasmus's Praise of Folly. His genealogy is that of the serene madman. The serene madman, a long hereditary line that goes back to the Latin poet Horace, when he tells us of a lunatic who spent his days in an auditorium laughing and applauding and having a high time because he thought that a play was being represented on the stage. When the auditorium was closed down and the madman driven from it, the unhappy soul could only exclaim, "You haven't cured me of my madness, but you have destroyed my pleasure and my illusion of happiness." Said St. Paul, "Let him who seems wise among you become mad, so that he can become truly wise. For I verily tell you that God's madness is wiser than all the knowledge of men." And Pascal echoes his thought. Man is so necessarily mad that it would be sheer madness through another turn of the screw of reason not to be a little mad. This is the lineage of Don Quixote, and Cervantes adopts it with all the stealth required in counter-reformation when alluding to the then forbidden Erasmus of Rotterdam. Through this secrecy, nevertheless, Cervantes strengthens his Erasmism even more than if he publicly confessed it. A masked Erasmus, a Spanish Renaissance man of views as wide as those of Shakespeare in England, Galileo in Italy, Spinoza in Holland, or Montaigne in France, Cervantes founds the modern novel as an act that brings together all the previous narrative strains and holds them in a single sheath.